Hi there, welcome to Emporium Threads TV. Today we are going to talk about hacks. Today we're going to talk about a pattern that came out last year. It's been around for a while. It is hugely popular and it is the H2O 2GO tumbler sling from Lynn's Handmade Designs. If you have not heard of this pattern, if you've not seen it before, I will certainly link you down below to her social media. Her group is phenomenal, and that is where our hack for today's tutorial comes from. But not only that, the original pattern itself is absolutely stunning. It's a fairly quick sew when you're talking about making a full-size bag, but it does take a little bit of intermediate skill. It's definitely one of those that is going to build your skills bag making. I will link you to all of the Lynn's Handmade social media as well as her website down below where you can buy the pattern for yourself, and you will need the original H2O 2GO pattern for today's tutorial for the hack. So let's talk about the hack. The original bag is great. I've made several of the original bag and I love them and customers love them, but they are a little time consuming. And then you also get the occasional customer who says, well, gosh, I really love the tumbler sling, but I don't need all the other components, right? Like I don't really care maybe about my phone, or I don't need card slots, or I'm not going to carry a pen. I kind of want something that's a little bit less involved. So this is where we come in with the hacked version. The hacked version of this pattern originally came to my attention from being in the Lynn's Handmade Designs Facebook group. So if you are not a member of that group, again, that will be linked in the sections below with all of our links so that you can go and join that group, because this hack is absolutely genius. It, from what I've seen, it seems to be the collaboration of several different group members in there who kind of said what you might be saying and what I was saying, which is, gosh, I love this. I love making this bag, but I want a simpler version. I want a quicker version. I want something that doesn't take up as much material, as much time to prep. The original bag has, probably 18 or so pieces that you got to cut, maybe like 12. And this piece has a total of 3. 3 pieces we got to cut out, one of which that we really have to do prep to an interface, depending on what materials you use. So this is what we're going to discuss today. This is what we're going to show you how to make. And by the time you get done with this, you're going to be like mind blown. So lots of different things going on here. It's a super easy tutorial. If you have ever been intimidated by the original H2O 2GO, but you really want to make one of those, come along with me. We're going to make this bag. You're going to see it's really easy. And honestly, once you get it down, it is a super fast sew. Let's make this bag. Okay. So remember, I said just 3 main body pieces to complete this bag, and you are looking at them. I have my 3 main components here of this bag, and then we'll discuss the tools and the materials that we are using to complete it. So we'll move this little one out of the way here. The first 2 pieces that I have here, and this is what you're going to need from the pattern. So you'll need to go and purchase the H2O 2GO pattern from Lynn's Handmade Designs from her website. And then you're going to pull out the lining piece. There's a large body lining piece that has the swoops like this in it, but it does not have the arched portion cut out of here. That arched portion is for the original bag with that rounded zipper, and we don't need that piece. We're going to set it aside. We don't need, in fact, any of the pieces except the lining main body piece. And it looks, like I said, just like this. And the one thing that you'll notice, it's a little bit shorter than these pieces I have sitting here. So we're going to pull out that lining piece, and you're going to go ahead and cut it like you normally would, except you're going to need a ruler and your cutting mat and all of that. And when you cut it, you're going to add a total of 2 inches. Okay. 2 full inches across the bottom of that lining piece. And you're going to use that lining piece to cut your main body portion of the bag out, which is what I have here in my hand. This is my outside of my bag, what it's going to look like. And then you're going to cut a second piece exactly the same size with that extra 2-inch strip on the bottom in a lining. What I have here is my lining piece out of waterproof canvas. 2 reasons that I did that. 1, it works really great for this bag. It gives it good stability. But again, because it's waterproof canvas, we don't have to add any interfacing to this. We can just cut it out in our in our extra large piece. So that lining again with that 2-inch strip, we'll cut it out and we're like done with it. So we'll set this aside because we don't need it until later and we're done. The main body panel piece that you cut out for your exterior of your bag, again, it is that lining piece from the H2O 2GO pattern. You're adding that extra 2 inches, and then what you're gonna do is interface it. Now, my go-to interfacings, I tend to differ a little bit on what I use versus what patterns ask for. This bag is no different, and today we're gonna interface the way that I interface 99% of my projects. So, on the back of this, I have got a woven fusible cotton, which you can't really see because it's actually underneath a second type of interfacing, but it's just a thin 100% cotton woven fusible interface that I have ironed on to my cotton. So that's step one of my interfacing process. The next portion of the process is to cut out another piece, the exact same, out of fusible fleece or something called thermolam. So fuse your preferred interfacings or the ones that I have suggested onto your exterior body panel, like I've got pictured here, and you're done prepping that piece so you can set it aside. The last thing that you're gonna need is this third piece of material here, and it is just a plain piece of cotton woven. You could also substitute this piece of cotton woven for waterproof canvas if you prefer. I like this method to be in cotton woven. So this cotton woven piece, it could be anything that matches your bag. It's going to be a pocket liner for that inset zipper pocket that we're adding. And you're gonna wanna cut this 8.5 inches tall by 11 inches wide. And that's very important. Any bigger than that, and you're not gonna be able to fit it on the bag just because we have to work within our seam allowances on the bag. And any smaller than that, and you're not gonna be able to fit most cell phones. So if you're looking to fit a cell phone into this pocket, you're really gonna wanna go for that size. This particular piece of cotton, like I said, is gonna be our pocket lining. And I tend to just starch this with spray starch and heat press it nicely so that it's got some good body and it's obviously not wrinkled, but I do not interface my pockets on small bags. I never have, I've never had an issue with it because they're small and not holding a lot of weight and not dangling from like the top of a tote bag. They tend to not get saggy and I don't have any issues with it. So for today's tutorial, I am not gonna do any kind of interfacing or anything to this cotton, but I do suggest that you starch and spray because it keeps the fabric a little bit more on grain and makes it a little nicer to work with. Here I have laid out all of the notions and tools that we'll be using today. And this is all that you're going to need if you're following along directly with me on this tutorial. You can obviously choose to make substitutes if you would like. For notions on this bag, those things are pictured here in the middle. And what we are working with today is hardware and notions specifically for the strap in 1-inch size. 1-inch size has always worked great for me. It's a bit more cost effective than any of the larger hardwares and it's more readily available. First, we have some nylon webbing. This is the softer, shinier type of nylon of webbing. It's softer on the skin and doesn't tend to pill on clothes, so this is the type that I prefer, and it was purchased on Amazon. I have 2 short pieces here that are both 3.5 inches long. I also have a longer strip here that's coiled up, that's between 56 and 58 inches long. In addition to our webbings, we have our 1-inch sized rectangle rings. I prefer a rectangle ring because I can directly attach my rectangle ring using these short pieces of nylon to my bag, and then I can permanently attach my 1-inch strap. It eliminates the need for more hardware, like a lobster claw, which in my opinion for this bag is not necessary. You would never use this bag without a strap, so to me it doesn't make a lot of sense to make it detachable. If we use rectangle rings for this method that we're doing today versus a D-ring, it also prevents the nylon webbing from twisting around on the rounded top of the D-ring. So that's why I prefer the straight rectangle rings. I also have here a 1-inch tri-glide or a strap adjuster to match my hardware. The last notion I've got here is a number 3 zipper. This is the type of zipper you would purchase at Joann's, usually made by Coats & Clark. You can also purchase them from Zip It on Etsy or off of Amazon, but it's a traditional number 3 zipper. You will need your zipper to be at least 8 inches long. This zipper is longer than 8 inches, and that's perfectly okay. We can trim it down a little bit. But for the purposes of this tutorial today, you will need at least an 8-inch zipper. That size allows for you to do the 7.5-inch tall pocket that we'll discuss. And when we do that 7.5-inch pocket, it's the perfect size for a cell phone or for an adult to be able to get their hand in the pocket. Other things that I have pictured here are the tools that we're going to be using. I have a couple of rulers here. I also have this template here. It is the number 3 zippered pocket template from emporiumthreads.com. This template allows us to take all the guesswork out of our welt or inset pockets. And because we're going to need a 7.5-inch sized pocket today, we'll be using the middle slot on this template, which is specifically sized for a 7.5-inch sized pocket. And that makes it perfect. During this tutorial today, I will be also showing you how to use this template. But if you are looking for just a tutorial on only the template without the rest of the bag, there's a separate video for that, and we will link it down below where we show that a bit more in depth. I also have a pair of sharp scissors, some double-sided stick tape. I also have a small box of clips here. I have a stiletto and seam ripper combo, which we will definitely need. I've got a pen, which is always good to keep handy, and we'll need it for our template today. If you're not using the template and you're going to measure out your welt pocket portion, you're still going to need a pen. The last thing that I have is a household lighter. I use that lighter to burn off my threads, but I also use it to singe and melt the ends of my nylon webbing. Step number 1 in this entire process is preparing our pocket lining. This is the piece that you would have cut that is 11 inches wide by 8.5 inches tall. We have a front side of our fabric here, and then we have a wrong side of our fabric. And to start off with, we're going to be working with the wrong or the ugly side of the fabric. So go ahead and turn that over. And you want the long sides to be at the bottom of your table, and you want the shorter sides to be up and down or vertical. I'm going to take my number 3 template and I'm going to line it up so that I can get my 7.5-inch sized pocket template where I need it to be on my piece. I want it to be roughly about 1 inch to 3/4 inch away from the edge of my piece here. So that's where we're placing our pocket, 3/4 inch to 1 inch away. The first thing I'm actually going to do on this piece of cotton woven is fold it up, and I'm just going to score lightly with my fingers across the whole piece. This gives me a centering line for my template. These templates come with score lines on them to help you center your template where it needs to be. So now that I've got my centering line, I can use the score line here to make sure that my pocket is perfectly centered. Again, I'm using this middle-sized slot on my template. It is the 7.5-inch sized slot. So I'm going to line up these scored lines along my centering line, and I'm going to use the straight edge of this pocket piece to line up along the edge of my cotton. That'll give me about 3/4 inch of margin between my slot and the edge of my fabric, and that's perfect. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my pen and I'm going to trace out my slot. I'm going to start by tracing out the long sides of my template here, and then I'm going to take the triangles in the template and I'm going to connect them. Any Bic pen or other type of pen that writes on fabric will do for this, because in the end we won't be seeing it. So that's step 1. I've traced out my triangles here and my long sides of my rectangle. I'm going to take a straight edge. Either of the long straight edges will do on my template, and I'm going to line them up so I'm connecting both sides of my rectangle point to point on each of these triangles. So I've effectively divided my template that I just traced out in half. And I'm going to start up here at point 1 of this triangle, and I'm going to connect it to the point of this triangle down here. Lastly, I'm going to take one more straight edge on my template, and I'm going to line it up at the bottom of one of my triangles, and I'm going to trace this line, making sure I'm as straight as possible, to connect the last point of my triangle. And then I'm going to repeat that process up here on the other triangle. In the end, what I should be left with is a rectangle with two triangles in it, one at the bottom, one at the top, and a dividing line between the whole rectangle that connects from one point of a triangle to another point of a triangle. In the last portion of our video, I showed you how to mark out your pocket using the number 3 zipper template that is for sale on my website, emporiumthreads.com. However, if you do not have one of these zipper templates, or you're not convinced that you want one, I'm now going to show you all of the steps to mark out an inset pocket using just a ruler. So we'll set this aside for now, and if you already marked out your pocket using your zipper template, or you already knew how to do this with a ruler and did it on your own, you can skip to the next portion of the video. So we'll set this aside. The things I'm going to need here to mark out my zipper pocket are, once again, my 8.5 by 11 piece of cotton woven. You'll need a pen and any ruler. I'm also using a cutting mat here to make sure that I can line things up. It's not necessary, but it does make things a little bit easier. Currently, I am looking at the pretty side of my cotton woven, so we're going to flip that over to make sure that we are looking at the wrong side. This is important that you work on the wrong side of your fabric. You're going to take your ruler, and we're now going to mark out our rectangle and our triangles of our inset pocket guidelines. First thing we're going to do is line this up. I'm lining it up on one straight edge of my mat here, and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure in 7/8 of an inch from the right edge. And I'm going to make a line that starts 1/2 inch from the top and stops 1/2 inch from the bottom. So just one long line. So let me get this marked out here. So starting 1/2 inch from the edge, top and bottom, and then stopping 1/2 inch. And 7/8 inch in from the edge. Our next line will be the same exact length, but it's going to be 1/4 of an inch in. So I'll line up my 1/4 inch mark here and 1/4 inch mark on my ruler. And then I'm going to make another line. Lost my mark there. So once again, 1/2 inch from top and bottom, and then 1/4 of an inch away from the other that I just made. So now we've got two, and we're going to make one more line the exact same. So 1/4 of an inch from the line that we just made, and once again, ½ inch from top and bottom. All right, and I never get these quite perfect and straight, but that's close enough. The next thing that we're going to do is take our ruler here and as straight as we can, lined up with the bottom edge. To make sure we're 1/2 inch in, I'm going to make a mark to connect all three of my lines, and then I'll do the same at the top. So now we have our rectangle with our line through the middle, and the last thing I'm going to do is make a triangle. So I'm going to take my ruler once again, and to get my triangle here, I'll mark 1/2 inch, lining up 1/2 inch off of this mark that I just made. Not the outside here, but the 1/2 inch line here that we just made on the short edge. I'm just going to make kind of a little dash right there. I'll do the same thing at the top. And then lastly, I'm going to go corner here to this point I just made to make my marks of my triangle. And I'm going to do that 4 times, so I end up with a triangle on each end of my top and bottom. It's important that we get these as straight as possible and as symmetrical as possible. So now what I've ended up with is a rectangle that should be 7.5 inches long by 1/2 inch wide. There should be a mark down the center of that, and you should have 2 triangles that both go 1/2 inch in from either side of your long rectangle. Next, we're going to grab our exterior body portion piece. So that is the lining piece from the H2O 2GO that we added 2 inches to and we cut for the outside of our bag, or the pretty fabric. We're going to lay that right side up on the table. And what we're going to go ahead and do is grab one of our rulers to measure to line this up. This ruler happens to be 2.5 inches wide, and I find that that is the perfect measurement for where I need to place my pocket. Again, my Welt pocket measurements are about 3/4 of an inch to an inch away from the edge of my fabric. And then I'm going to take my ruler, which is 2.5 inches, and line that up on the edge of my fabric. And then I'm going to line up the straight edge of my cotton piece here with my Welt pocket measurements on the right side. This is important because when we pull our lining through, putting it in this area of the fabric ensures that not only will it fit where it needs to and be out of that seam allowance that's on the back side of the bag, but it also means that our pocket will go toward the front of the bag, which is where we have the most surface area on the bag because there's no seam on the front. There's nothing to get into the way of our pocket when we shove a phone or something else in there. So I'm going to line this up, ensuring that I have left enough room on the bottom and enough room on the top to keep out of my seam allowances. The top seam allowance is the most important one here. It's about 3/8 of an inch. So we're just going to make sure we leave ourselves roughly 3/8 of an inch here and make sure that we scooch our piece up as close to that as possible. I like to leave a little bit more than 3/8 of an inch, just about 1/2 inch or so from the top portion here. If you need another ruler, you can certainly use that. You can always just move this one to the side. That's about 1/2 inch. We'll scoot that up. Line this up on the side here again, making sure that we're close to where we need to be. This looks perfect. We've got enough room here at the bottom that we should be able to cut out our pieces later for the boxed bottom, and we've left enough room for our seam allowance up here on top when we assemble the bag. Grab your pins. Take just a couple of pins. I like to pin 4 times, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, and that will prevent any kind of shifting while I'm sewing my Welt pocket piece to my main body. And that just ensures everything stays nice and straight. If you are using vinyl for your body exterior piece, do not pin. If you pin this piece to your vinyl, you will have holes, and that will be really unsightly and really sad. You'll get all the way to the end, and the front and sides of your bag are going to have holes in them. So if you are doing this, you can go ahead and grab a couple of small pieces of double stick tape if you want, and you can put them between underneath this layer and on your vinyl. That will help with shifting, and you can peel it off easily later. No one will know that it was there, and you won't have marred the surface of your bag. I'm going to start out by aligning my needle on the outside of my rectangle. There's no seam allowance here because we're actually going to be stitching on the outside of the rectangle that we made. Remember, we're not going to be stitching on the triangles, and we're not going to be stitching the center line of this template we drew out. As you can see, all I did was stitch around the outside of my rectangle. The next step we're going to do is grab our seam ripper and our stiletto combo. We're going to use the seam ripper to cut a slit through this template that we drew using just the center line. I'll use my sharp scissors to finish cutting the rest of this. I have now cut all of my template out here. So I've got my 2 triangle pieces and a slit all the way through the middle. The next portion of this is going to be where we turn it and we press it. So we'll do all of that at our ironing board. Before we head over there, an important note on this. My machine is perfectly fine sewing through all of these layers, even when I turn it and I end up with some bulk on the edges of this. If your machine is finicky and it doesn't like to sew through a lot of layers of fleece or fusible interfacings and things, what you'll want to do is turn this over to the wrong side, looking at your assembly over here with the slit. You can actually trim off the back layers, when you're looking at it from this portion, the back layers of the fusible foam and the attached fabric. So it would be the fabric of your main body lining here within the rectangle and the foam. Do not cut the lining. It's very important that you not cut any portion of the lining. We need that to turn and secure our pocket pieces. So if you want to cut this out, take a pair of scissors. I would suggest a duckbill scissor or an applique scissor. It makes it a little bit easier. And you can actually just cut all of this fusible fleece out, and you can cut the triangles, but remember, don't ever cut the lining piece that we just attached. Now we're at our ironing board, and we're going to go ahead and take this entire assembly we've been working on, and we're going to turn our pocket inside our bag, and then we're going to go ahead and press our opening. First step we're going to do is remove all of our pins from the project. Next step, reach your hand in through this right side of your project, grab your liner, and pull it through. When we do that, what we end up with, if we turn it over, is the back side of our main body panel, the ugly side of our exterior fabric, and we've got the pretty side of our liner. We're going to begin by pulling everything through to the back side, all the short sides, all the edges. So now that I've pulled everything through to the back side, all of the short sides and edges, I'm actually going to turn this back over to my front side. So you can see right now on the front side, we've got a lot of this pocket still showing, and we don't want that. So I'm going to reach my hand underneath the project, and I will pull and roll with one hand, pulling with the other hand toward the back side. And now what we see on the side I just pulled is none of the pocket lining. It's all toward the back side, and I'm starting to see my opening take shape. I'm going to use my iron, and I'm going to press a little bit at a time as I roll with one hand and pull from the back side with the other hand on all sides of this rectangle. In the end, I'll be left with a nice clean rectangle, no puckers, and everything will stay put for me to attach my zipper. This process can take a little bit of time. We'll probably speed this up for you so you don't have to watch me do all of it in real time, but trust me, you want to spend the time ironing now. This pressing stage is very critical to have an end result that looks beautiful. There, you can see that I'm left with a nice crisp rectangle opening. This is where I'm going to apply my zipper in the next step. You want to make sure at this stage you are free of puckers on the edge. Like I said, if you have puckering here in the corners, it just means that you didn't trim close enough in, and you'll need to go ahead and just flip this over, push it right back out to the right sides where we originally, or to the wrong sides, I should say, where we originally stitched this, and just trim a tiny bit closer to the inside. If we do that, we'll be left with a pucker-free project that looks beautiful. I grabbed my zipper, my tools, and my double stick tape, and now I'm going to go ahead and apply this zipper. So another thing that I like to do on a lot of my projects when I use a pre-made zipper like this, I like to save and use my zipper stop on my projects. So my base of my rectangle is here, and I'm going to line this stop up so that it actually hits inside of the rectangle. And the reason that I do that again is so that when I unzip my zipper head and I come all the way down, I'm not actually hitting my fabric. I'm preserving the edge of the fabric here and the stitching a little bit better by utilizing this zipper stop. If you're using custom number 3 zipper, you won't have a stop, and that's okay. You'll just cut your length of zipper, make sure you put the head on the zipper ahead of time, and then go ahead and use that just like I'm about to use my number 3 zipper. So I'm going to first line this up, and right there's where I need to pull the zipper head to. I actually, for this step, just pulled the zipper to the edge of the size of my rectangle, and I'm using that as a marker. I'll show you why. I put this here where the beginning of my rectangle starts, and I know that it stops at the edge of this zipper stop down here. So now I know the size of my opening, and that will help me measure for where I need to put my double stick tape. I also leave the head up here for this stage while I'm putting on the tape, instead of pulling my zipper down into the middle of the rectangle. 2 reasons that I do that. One, the biggest reason, is so that I can apply my double stick tape to the length of the portion of zipper that I'm using. And it means that my zip tape, since the head is up here and it's zipped completely straight the whole way, my zip tape will stay on grain, on weft, and not get pulled out of weave, basically. Doing it this way will keep the tape straight, and that ensures in the end, when I apply this, I have less of a chance of getting what I refer to as a drunken zipper. A drunken zipper is when your zip tape is very wavy, the teeth themselves are wavy, it won't be straight in your opening, and it just overall looks a lot more unsightly than a nice clean straight zipper. So if you leave your head of your zipper zipped up through this part of applying your double stick tape, you'll have a better result. But we will end up pulling this down in just a moment. Okay, the next step is going to be to align our zipper within our rectangle. And for this stage, you'll want to go ahead and pull your zipper head down right to the edge of your tape. I like to start at the bottom where my zip stop's going to be because I know exactly where I want that. And having that zip stop visually helps me center my zipper in the opening. So gently lift your project and place it over the zipper, ensuring that the zipper is relatively straight when you do so. And line up the bottom first so that that zip stop is centered and also inside of the project. And you can give that portion of the project a little press to get that zip tape stuck to the back of your project. Gently correct your zipper as you lay everything down, ensuring that your lining pieces are not turning back through the hole as you go, and then go ahead and press it when either side looks appropriate and correct. If you need to pull your zip head down just a tiny bit, you can do that. At this stage, if you notice that you have any wonkiness in your zipper, correct it by gently peeling the project back apart and relaying it. If it is crooked or the teeth are twisted or there is any type of waviness in anything, it's going to be there later. So now is the time to go ahead and fix that. You can gently peel the project apart and just give everything a little bit of a correction. And then press your double stick tape once more. That looks pretty good to me. Better. So now we're going to take this back to our sewing machine. I'm going to swap over to my zipper foot You can use a piping foot, depending on what that looks like for your machine, or any type of foot that allows you to get very, very close without bumping into your zipper if you don't have a zipper foot. I'm going to use that zipper foot to then stitch very, very closely onto the edge of this rectangle. Now our zipper is top stitched all the way around the edges. You can see I got nice and close to the edge, and when we flip this over and turn it to the back side, you can see I caught all of the edges of my zipper tape like I needed to. The last thing I'm going to do is take my sharp scissors and trim off the extra tails of this zipper that was too long. I'm going to trim it right to the edge of this fabric. The next step will be to close up our pocket lining. The absolute easiest way to do this is take our pocket lining and fold it over, matching up the corners here and the corners here on this edge. You won't need to iron this, you can just finger press it to get it to lay down nicely. I actually take this whole thing and flip it over to the right side and peel back the top layer of my main body panel. And while I do that, I hold down the corners that I have matched up on the lining piece, just like this. And then I go ahead and insert it in my sewing machine, and with about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I just go ahead and stitch across the entire top, taking care to backstitch at both the beginning and the ending. And then I'm going to repeat this exact same process on both of the short sides of my pocket lining, peeling back the main exterior body panel, laying it on its side here, kind of doubled over, exposing the underside and stitching right here along this edge of the pocket on the top and the bottom. With this, our Welt zipper pocket is complete. Our next steps to completing this bag are going to be to take this main assembly we've been working on. We're going to fold it right sides together, lining up our 2 open raw edges here. And we're going to go ahead and stitch down this entire length of the bag here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We'll repeat this same step with our lining panel. The pattern calls for a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the lining as well. However, for this particular hack, you're going to want to take a little bit more than a 3/8 of an inch, just a scant amount. Reason being, the original pattern has this lining piece as the lining, and then it has the exterior piece, and they are cut differently so that the seam allowances will all match up in the end. But since we're doing a hack and we're using the same piece of lining twice, once for the outer shell and then once also for the lining, we're going to want to take a little bit more off of our lining panel so that in the end we don't end up with a saggy and baggy lining. So when we bring our next piece over here, I take literally just a sheer tiny amount, but it is a little bit more. Some people would refer to it as a scant amount. So like here's my stitch line. I'm gonna take about 1/16 of an inch more past my 3/8 inch seam allowance on my lining. That's enough to prevent me from having a baggy lining. Now we have our lining piece and our main body piece sewn down the back sides. I didn't mention leaving an opening in our lining piece because I prefer this method of stitching all the way down the back side in the seam allowance and then going back through with my seam ripper and cutting an opening here. Especially when working with waterproof canvas, what this does is make small perforations inside of our lining piece that won't really affect anything, but what it will do is make it lay nicer when we turn our bag through and go to close up our lining piece. So now I'm going to take my seam ripper and I'm going to go ahead and open up a portion of this, and when I go to box my bottom at the sewing machine on my lining piece later, I'll go ahead and reinforce backstitch here and here. Now I've got my opening for turning my bag. You can go through when you're sitting at the sewing machine later and pull these small threads out. The next step is going to be boxing the bottoms of our bag pieces. We'll start with our outer body portion first, so we'll set the lining aside. For this step, you're going to need your pen and you're going to need some sort of ruler with inch and smaller markings. Let's first take our bag, looking at the seam that we just stitched, and we're going to go ahead and grab up here at the edges where we're going to connect our D-rings later, and we're going to line them up corner to corner. We'll go ahead and lay this back down on the table with it folded, and we'll just go ahead and gently press with our hands. What this is effectively doing is quartering our bag. We're also going to need our clips for this stage, so grab your clips. I'm just going to grab a couple and I'm going to clip along the top to keep everything aligned. I'll press this seam open and clip right there in the middle, and then I'm going to clip on either side. That'll help keep everything lined up. Now we're going to be working at the bottom of our bag. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure out 2 squares, one on each side. Before I do that, I will also press open this seam and pin the bottom together just so I can keep everything nicely aligned. We'll grab our pen and our ruler, and we are going to measure only on the exterior piece 1 3/4 inch squares, so 1 3/4 inch tall by 1 3/4 inch wide from the bottom edge and the side edge of our bag piece. It's important to be fairly precise on this step. However, this hack is so easy. If you're not super precise, nobody's gonna know. You just need to get really close. So there's my one side with my 1 3/4 inch square, and I'll do the same thing on this side. It's okay for you to tuck underneath the zipper a little bit, and if you need to push it up out of the way, totally fine as well. You want to only be marking on the bag and not on the zipper pocket. In the end, if you lined everything up correctly, you should be relatively close to that pocket or possibly overlapping it by just a couple of millimeters. There you can see my 2 squares. The next piece of equipment I'm going to need is my sharp scissors. Let's take our sharp scissors and we're going to cut through all the layers of this bag, cutting here and here to remove our squares. It's going to be cutting all of the layers that we've got folded right here, so the back and the front. So we'll go ahead and trim this line first, and then this guy here. And then we'll repeat that on the other side, taking care not to trim our zipper or our pocket. You can either discard these or set them aside for another project later, but we won't be using them anymore today. We're going to repeat this same process on our lining piece. However, the measurements are going to be a little bit different. You can set this piece aside for now. Grab your lining piece and repeat the same process by first looking at the seam, pressing everything open, clipping if you need to keep things lined up, and then you're going to mark out your squares. I'm first going to clip everything. Now that it's clipped, I can start measuring out my squares. I say squares on the lining piece, but it's actually not going to end up being perfectly square this time. It's going to be close, but we want to go ahead and take off a little bit extra on our squares here so that our boxed bottom fits nicely inside of our exterior boxed bottom. So to do this, we're going to measure 2 inches from the bottom here, so 2 inches tall, and it's going to end up being 3/4 inch wide like before. So 3/4 inch wide by 2 inch tall this time. We'll now repeat the process of cutting out the pieces that we just traced. Once again, you can discard these cutouts or save them later for a different project. Now that we have our exterior portion with our cutouts and our liner with our cutouts, the first thing we're going to do is stitch across the bottom of both pieces. We're going to take the same 3-inch seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, that we used before for this back seam on the exterior lining. And once again, we're going to take just a hair more on that 3/8 inch seam allowance on the base of our liner to ensure that it fits nicely. So take these to the sewing machine, stitch across, and take care to backstitch at the beginning and end points on both of these bottom pieces. All right, we've stitched across the bottom of both of these pieces. The next step is going to be to box both the corners of the lining piece and the exterior body piece. This can seem a little bit challenging or a little bit weird, but it's really not hard. We'll start with our exterior body portion of the bag first, so we'll push the lining aside. Set your piece where you're looking at the bottom right up at you. So the bottom seam that we just stitched should be looking at you like this. Take your pointer fingers and you're going to insert them into this box at the diagonal corners on either side. pry the bag apart, putting your thumbs behind your forefingers and pull, just like this. You're sort of making the open up like how you would if you were looking at a little kid who was pulling their mouth open and sticking their tongue out, right? So put your fingers in, thumbs here, and pull, and you're making a straight line. Do you see the difference there? We had our corners. We're putting our fingers in like this, and then pulling to create a straight line. Oops. There's our straight line, and we're going to go ahead and just clip this all the way across just a couple of times. 2 to 3 clips should do. Take care to make sure that your pocket is not clipped inside of all of this. We're going to repeat that same process on the opposite side. This hack is so easy. If your corners are not perfectly lined up, it's okay. What you're ultimately looking for is that both sides of your bag are about the same length from corner to corner that we just made on your box. If it's not perfect, nobody is going to know. This hack is extremely beginner friendly. We're going to repeat the same process on our lining piece, the exact same way that we did it here. And then we'll take both of these to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch where we've just clipped from edge to edge using our same seam allowances, remembering to take just a hair more on the lining pieces so that it fits nicely. Now that we have finished boxing the bottom of our outer portion of our bag and our lining, we're going to take our sharp scissors and we're going to trim the seam allowances of the seams that we just created. On the outer portion of your bag, take care to not trim the zipper or the pocket when you trim your seam allowance. Repeat on your lining. Now, we're going to leave the exterior of our bag inside out like this for the next step. And for the moment, we're going to set our lining aside. For this next step, you're going to need the short pieces of webbing that we talked about at the intro of the video. They should be 3.5 inches long by 1 inch wide. And you're also going to need your 2 1-inch sized rectangle rings. We're going to take one piece of our nylon webbing and one of our rectangle rings, and we're just going to thread the piece through the rectangle ring and then use a clip to simply hold it on there. Repeat the process with the other 2 pieces. Now we're going to take the exterior body portion that we left inside out. I find this step much easier to do when the bag is inside out versus right side out. So we're going to start working on one of these portions. Doesn't matter which one. You can simply fold the other inside the bag and out of the way. Take one of your rectangle rings and nylon webbing pieces, and you're going to line it up in the middle of one of these sides, and you're going to put the rectangle ring towards the inside of your bag. So what should be sticking up out here from the top is going to be the wrong sides or the raw sides of our nylon pieces. We're simply going to go ahead and stitch this so that we have, I like to leave about a 1/2 inch sticking out of the top right here. We're going to go ahead and stitch right along here. You can baste this. I say baste, but I don't actually change my stitch length to a longer stitch. I simply stitch back and forth. This is just the first line of stitching to keep these in place. It's not actually what's securing it, so it's okay that it's very close to the top. We're going to have at least 2 more lines worth of stitching between when we actually attach our lining to the exterior bag piece and when we top stitch. Go ahead and repeat this same step on the opposite side with the other rectangle ring and piece of webbing. Now that both of our rectangle rings and webbing pieces have been attached on the sides here, we're going to go ahead and stuff our lining and our bag together for our final assembly. We'll first need to turn our lining right side out. So right now it is inside out with the ugly side toward us. We're going to want to look at the pretty side. So we'll start by turning that. Here on the bottom, we can see our boxed bottom on the lining and how it's taken shape. The same thing will have happened to our exterior bag piece. The next step will be to take our lining, which is now right side out, and we're going to stuff it inside of our bag exterior. So right now you should be looking at the inside or the wrong side of your bag exterior body panel. So you should be looking at stabilizer, not your pretty fabric, but you should be looking at the pretty side of your lining. You're going to stuff this inside of your bag exterior. When you do this, there are 2 different ways to do it. You've got a seam on the back side of the bag here on the exterior, and you've got a seam on the lining. I prefer to alternate my seams. So you could do one of 2 things. You could put the seam on this side of the bag, lining it up with the other seam on the back side. Or you could choose to put it on the front side of the bag. I choose to put mine on the front side of the bag because I find that staggering or alternating my seams actually helps to evenly weigh the bag a little bit better, especially when you're using waterproof canvas, which is heavy. On the seam side, it's going to be a little bit heavier than the other side, which does not have a seam on that lining. And I find if I put all the seams on one side of the bag, it tends to make my bag fall over, and I don't really care for that. If there's no cup in it, it can fall over. If there's a cup in it, it doesn't really matter. So it's up to you. The other thing is alternating seams, one to the back and one to the front between the lining and the body. You're going to end up with less bulk. If your machine does not like bulk, this is the method that I suggest for you. That way you have just one seam back here that will end up split open like this, and one seam on this side where it is split open instead of all the seams on the other side and a lot of bulk in one area. if your machine can handle the bulk, it doesn't really matter how you do it. So I'm going to opt to stuff my linings with my seams opposite. So I'm just going to cram this in there. Like so. And then the first thing we're going to do is line up our sides. Your D-rings should be, or rectangle rings rather, should still be where the raw side is sticking up, and it'll end up being sandwiched between your lining piece and your bag exterior piece. So it should look just like this. Go ahead and line up all those corners and pin around the entire top or clip, and then we will go ahead and finish assembling the bag. We're all clipped around the exterior top and we're ready to sew. We're taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire exterior top of this bag. I like to sew from the inside of the bag in the round. You may find that it's easier to do it a different way, but I definitely prefer this method. I can fold down one portion of the bag so that I can easily see as I go and remove the clips as I go, and I just find that it is so much easier that way. I also tend to like to start on one of the flaps, sewing across the top, so I can make sure that that's nice and secure. So we're all attached with our lining and our main body panel. The next step before we turn is going to be to take our sharp scissors, and we want to trim all the corners, all 4 of them, next to our rectangle ring and our web tabs here. Reason being, when we turn this, it will just help our corners turn out so much nicer. And it's a really simple step that we can do now for a better result later. Trim as closely as you can without getting any of those stitches or trimming your tabs off. Now we're going to turn the bag. Go ahead and reach inside the bag, grab the bottom of the lining, and pull it out. Next, find the hole that you left for yourself in your lining. Go ahead and reach inside of that hole, reach all the way down to the bottom, push your bag bottom into your fist like this, and then go ahead and pull it out. Because we don't have that bulky round pocket on the front, and we don't have the large base or anything else, this becomes extremely easy for us to turn. Push our bottom of our lining through. Get that out of the way, and then we'll reach in here for our rectangle rings and pull those through. Same on the other side. And because we trimmed our corners, this came out pretty nice, but I can go ahead and take the blunt ends of my stiletto and seam ripper combo if I want to, or any other blunt object, and pop these corners out on either side of my tabs a little bit more if I'm not satisfied with the way that they look. I'm going to press these out just a little bit with one of my seam rippers. I love the dull ends or blunt ends on these for this exact reason. Just gonna work those out a little bit more. Before you close up your lining, go ahead and do the same to the bottom of your exterior bag, making sure to poke all these corners out all the way. And look at how good our pocket looks with our zipper stop there. So excited about this. All right, that's all poked out nicely. And so now the next step would be to close up our lining. So remember I said we could pull out all those little threads from the piece that we cut before, and I went ahead and reinforced with backstitching the open edges here. And the reason that I did that, like I said, is because in the end we get a little bit of a perforation here where we sewed, and it just folds really nicely. So kind of how we did our boxed bottom, you're gonna take your fingers in this opening and go ahead and pull on the corners either way, and that'll sort of make everything sit nicely. I'm gonna reach in here real quick and poke out my lining corners a little bit so this sits a little nicer. There we go. And then pull this guy just like that. And once we get it lined up nice, there we go. See, our seam just kind of sat really nicely, and I'm gonna go ahead and grab 3 or 4 clips. We don't need a ton, maybe 4 or 5. And I'm gonna start at one end, just past where the opening actually is. I'm gonna pinch, and then I'm gonna just clip right there. And I'm gonna do that all the way down to the other side where it's open. Down here toward the base where it curves can get a little bit tricky, but again, we kind of have our guide where we stitched before, so we can sort of tell. And the canvas, especially waterproof canvas, but cotton will do this too, it kind of wants to lay and fold where it was stitched before. And I'm just gonna clip it the whole way down. So there we go. Next thing to do would be to change our thread to a color that's very similar to our lining, mostly because if we do that, it makes this closure extremely hard to see. It's practically invisible, and again, being that it's the lining, nobody's gonna notice. If you prefer, you can look up how to do a ladder stitch and close this in a completely invisible way. A ladder stitch is not hard to do, but it does take some practice to get it well done. And if you can get it to look nice enough, it really will be invisible. I find this method is perfectly fine, and I've never had anyone complain about it, especially for a hacked bag like this where we're trying to save ourselves time. I would suggest going with this method to close. My thread's all changed out. Let's go ahead and sew this closed. Our last step on the bag portion is going to be to stuff our lining back into our bag. As we do this, we're going to roll the seam up here between the lining and the main bag exterior and clip it, making sure that the lining is actually stuffed inside of the bag. If we took the right seam allowances, our lining should fit nice and tight inside of the bag without being baggy or saggy, and we should not have any extra bulges or anything like that if we got the right seam allowances on everything. So I'm just gonna roll this gently inside a little bit first on all sides. And then I'm going to stuff it in. I'm gonna take care to push my corners of my liner into the corners of the bag, tugging as I go on my straps up here. That is one good looking lining. It's not super baggy, it's not sagging all over the place, and by the time we top stitch it, it's gonna be phenomenal. Now I'm gonna go ahead and roll this seam all the way around and clip as I go to prepare for top stitching. The front of the bag is the most important to me, so I'm going to make sure that that lays nice and flat and my lining is rolled inside so it's not a distraction on the front of my bag. Then I'm going to go out from there. All right, we're clipped and ready to top stitch. I'm gonna switch back from my zipper foot to my clear applique open toe foot. Reason being, I like to top stitch with the edge of my foot lined up against the edge of my project. This foot for me has a very, very narrow edge, which means I get a really close top stitch that's even and consistent all the way around by doing it the way that I do it. So we'll swap that foot out. I've got good threads for top stitching here. I'm happy with those colors. So I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch. Once again, I do this from the inside of the bag on this particular project. Some projects I won't do that. It just really depends on what the project is. But this one has a very small opening. So trying to stitch stuffing one side in and doing it like this from the top is a little bit tougher. You can choose to do that if you want to. But I am just gonna do it from the inside of the bag, stuffing this portion in and looking at my lining while I top stitch. Now we've come to the portion in the tutorial where our bag is done and all we've got to do is make our adjustable strap. For this portion, you're going to need your clips, your adjustable tri-glide or slider, the bag itself, completed, top stitched, lining closed, everything finished, and you're going to need that 56 to 58 inch long piece of nylon webbing that we cut earlier. Now I've already gone ahead and lit my ends with my household lighter here, just to make sure that they don't fray. I see a little bit of fraying on this one though, so I'm gonna hit it again, just to make sure. I always do this on any of the webbing that I am using, just because it gives me a little bit of extra insurance and make sure that my product stays nice in the end. So what we're gonna do, I treat this situation with my tri-glide very similar to how you tie a tie on yourself to then put on somebody else. I always do it this way. That way I am ensured to get it correct and make sure my strap's not twisted. So I'm going to show you that method. The first thing I do is take my tri-glide and one end of my strap. I'm going to go ahead and thread it. There is a top side, by the way, a right side and a wrong side to most tri-glides if it's made of metal. So be aware of that. We want to be looking at the pretty side. So we're going to thread in to our pretty side right here, and then we're going to thread back out of it. So we are looking at this. We're going to take about 2 inches here. I'm going to fold it in on itself like this. And then I'm going to fold that over toward this big side here, the long side of everything that we've just done. And what that basically is doing is securing a loop around my tri-glide center slider there. And I double it over like that. You can just do it single, but then you'd be left with a raw edge right here, and that will fray over time with use. And so I actually tuck the raw edge sandwiched between these two parts. That way it's just a little more secure. And now I'm going to take it to my machine. And I'm going to go ahead and sew. First, I'm going to clip it to hold it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and sew using my zipper foot because it's got really low clearance and I can get very, very close to my tri-glide edge. I'm going to sew a square around the outside edges here, very close to the edge. And then I'm going to sew an X across those. If you wanted to do this a little bit quicker, you could simply go across the bottom here once or twice, and then once and twice back and forth across the top here. You don't have to do the whole square or what's kind of known as a bar tack on this portion if you didn't want to, because it ends up being hidden and it's the part that has less strain on it, in my opinion. This other end is the part that's directly attached to the bag and it's got a little more strain. So I always do the bar tack or the square with the X style stitching on this. But first, we'll take this to machine and we will sew it up. All right, this is all stitched up just the way I like it. I used matching thread that went really well with my webbing. That way it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb and it's not super evident that there's any stitching there at all. And of course, I went ahead and did the box with the cross through it because that is the strongest way of doing this. And I like my items to really have good longevity and good usability for as long as possible. So now we're going to take this strap and we're going to thread it through our bag. This can get a little tricky if you don't take your time because you could end up with a twisted strap or have it be backwards. So let's take our time and I'll show you the method that I usually use to do this. This portion of the strap with the little lip on it, okay, where we folded it, that's what we want to be looking at right now. Keep your thumb and your left hand on that part. Now, go all the way to the end of your webbing. So we make sure that we just basically went from one of our thumbs to the other thumb here and we slid all the way down. Okay, that way we make sure our strap is not twisted. We're going to take this part with our thumb that has not left our strap and we are going to thread it from the inside here, inside portion of our bag between these two rings to the outside. I still have my hand on this part, still have my thumb on that lip, and I'm gonna go ahead and just pull this all the way through. And that ensured doing it that way that it did not get twisted. But we're gonna check a couple more times to make sure it doesn't get twisted. Right now, we're straight, we are not twisted. And my lip is facing toward my body right here, this way where my thumb is. All right, we're gonna go ahead and slide all the way back down our strap so we make sure it doesn't get twisted. We're going to thread this just past that lip where our thumb is into the tri-glide. Okay, and then we're gonna pull it all the way through. We're gonna pull it taut right now just to make sure we are not twisted, and we're not twisted, so we're good to go. We're going to thread it through the last part of our D-ring, or our tri-glide, excuse me. So I'll put my thumb back here. I'm going to slide back down my piece of webbing and I'm going to insert it into the last portion of the tri-glide. Once again, making sure I am not having any twisting. So if you put this under tension and pull, everything should be nice and flat. Then we get up here. Our ugly side where that lip was is sandwiched between the outside here and the loop portion, which is exactly the way that we want that. So it's nice and smooth and clean up against the body. And that portion is done. So now we're going to take this, making sure that we do not get twisted once again. So put your thumb on your tri-glide and then put your thumbs together and then just slide down your webbing. If you slid all the way down your webbing and you got to this point, what you will now do is insert this from the outside of the bag toward the middle between your two little flaps up here with your rings on them. Okay. You're going to do just like you did on the tri-glide side. So fold about an inch, inch and a half of your webbing over, and then stick it to the side opposite. And we're just going to kind of massage that into place. So you should have this, your D-ring or rectangle ring. This part where the lip is should be toward the inside of the bag when this is sitting straight, and it is. There's the lip, and we're going to go ahead and clip this. And before we stitch anything down, you can go ahead and hang this around your neck. Put your neck up here in this portion and put the bag kind of in your lap and double check that nothing is twisted, that everything is nice and straight. We're nice and straight all the way around here, all the way back, no twisting, everything is as it should be. If everything is as it should be and you do not have any twisting, you can take this over to your machine and stitch this down, and that will be the finish of your bag. All right, there you have it. If you completed your strap, then you've got a completed hacked box bottom H2O to go. You can test fit your tumbler in there. It is a perfect fit. Our pocket looks beautiful there on the side. We've got a wonderful high strength, pretty looking strap, and we're all good to go. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you can get this method down so that you can create a lot of these for your next festival or gift giving season. They'll definitely save you time and some money as a maker, or maybe they're just a little bit less intimidating than the regular H2O to go, and you can use this form of the pattern to get your feet wet and hopefully make the actual pattern with the rounded bottom and the rounded pocket at a later time. Thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to this video, and we'll be putting out more content for you soon. Thank you so much. Let's do this. Oh, and I already did that backwards. Okay. Let me experiment here really quick and make sure I know what the hell I'm doing so I can explain this. Making sure it's not twisted. Still making sure, except it's twisted. How did we get twisted? This pen, I like to nest the head of it just one more time in there because I work with my hands on this side, and if you don't nest the head of this pen, I have a tendency to drag my hand over it and prick myself, which is really uncomfortable, and it can also lead to bleeding on your project. Ask me how I know. Now that I have gone ahead and pinned this, I am going to, now that I've gone ahead and pinned this, I'm going to go ahead and take it over to my sewing machine, and we are going to stitch around the outside of this rectangle that we drew, and only the outside. It's very important that we do not stitch any of this portion of the points of the triangle. And it is very important that we do not stitch this center line.